Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Eerie News, and today is August 13th, 2024. Tuesday, August 13th, 2024, which, by the way, for Hispanics, it's not Friday the 13th, which is unlucky. It's Tuesday the 13th, which is unlucky. So there you go. And now we're going to go off to, for some people, that it was a very, very unlucky. I don't know whatever day it was unlucky for them. All right. This is out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories and is titled The Zombie Maker. Jeffrey Dahmer was captured more than 3 decades ago. However, mention of his name still causes a shudder. Dahmer was incarcerated in 1991 to serve 16 life sentences for the crimes he admitted to, which were drugging, strangling, and dismembering his victims. He had sex with 4 corpses, ate parts of others, and flushed brains and other organs down the toilet. He admitted to 17 victims since 1978 that ranged in age from 14 to 33. Many have wondered if there were more. Dahmer was sentenced to 5 years of probation for molesting a child in 1989. It was reported that police found torsos soaking in acid, severed heads in the refrigerator and freezer, a hand and genital organ in an 80-quart kettle, and photos of victims in various stages of dismemberment. 2 human hearts and a bicep were in the freezer, set aside to eat later. 3 years after Dahmer was convicted, he was killed in prison by another inmate named Christopher Scarver, 25, who also killed Jesse Anderson, a businessman who bludgeoned and stabbed his wife more than 20 times. In 2015, Scarver changed his story as to why he killed Dahmer. He claimed that he hated Dahmer because he taunted other inmates by, quote, turning his food into the shapes of severed body parts and then adding ketchup to make it look like blood, end quote. Another complaint from Scarver was that Dahmer was not repentant. He said he kept a newspaper article detailing how Dahmer killed 17 young men and boys from 1978 to 1991. According to Scarver, Dahmer caused so much friction with other inmates that when he was outside of his cell, he had an escort of at least 1 guard. Scarver said he kept his distance from Dahmer until November 28, 1994, when he, along with Dahmer and a 3rd inmate, Jesse Anderson, were brought to clean the prison bathrooms. They were unshackled and the guards left them unattended. Scarver described how he was filling a bucket and someone poked him in the back. When he turned around, Dahmer and Anderson were laughing under their breath. Dahmer and Scarver went to a staff locker room where Scarver grabbed a metal bar from a weight lifting set and asked Dahmer if he'd done what was described in the article. He then proceeded to beat Dahmer as he described it. I put his head down. He then went to where Anderson was working and he meted out the same beating. He got his head put out. Anderson survived until December 1st when he was taken off life support. Dahmer was beaten so severely it was difficult to recognize him. He died an hour after he was found. 4 months before, another inmate tried to cut Dahmer's throat during chapel service, but the razor he had made fell apart. Dahmer's stepmother told newspapers in 1994 that his family expected that he would meet his end while in prison. Gerald Boyle, his trial lawyer, said, Dahmer had a death wish, and I know that he didn't have the gumption to do it himself. So I had predicted that day would come when he would be killed in prison. Scarver said he didn't believe it was an accident. He was left alone with Dahmer, and he inferred that the officials wanted him to execute Dahmer, who they wanted dead all along. After first pleading insanity, Scarver changed it to no contest in exchange for transfer to a federal penitentiary. When he killed Anderson and Dahmer, Scarver was serving a life sentence for the execution-style murder of a former boss that he shot 4 times in the head. The motive for the murder was robbery and vengeance against a job training program that he thought had wronged him. After he killed the man, he forced the program site manager to write him a check for $3,000. His explanation to police when he was arrested was that the voice had told him what to do. When he went to prison, he proclaimed he was the Son of God and that a family of voices told him who I could trust and who was my enemy. For the murder of Dahmer and Anderson, he got 2 additional life terms. Prior to this, according to prison records, Scarver had attacked prisoners and staffers, slashed his own wrists, and made death threats. Dahmer's attorney, Steven Eisenberg, said he received a letter from inmate Derek Hendricks, who also went by the name of Melanie Samuels, a transvestite with a history of personality disorders, who claimed Dahmer was one of 7 names on the hit list of inmates' death squad. Hendricks was serving time after being convicted in 1992 for having sex with teenage boys in Milwaukee. 6 months after Dahmer and Anderson were killed, 4 prison guards were suspended for a security breakdown. The panel who investigated the incident rejected conspiracy theories. 10 months after his murder, Dahmer's body was cremated as he had requested. His brain was held back as his parents feuded over whether to donate it for research. His father, Lionel Dahmer, had claimed his half of his son's ashes, and his mother, Joyce Flint, was to receive the rest. She was the one that wanted the brain to be examined for biological factors that affected her son. Scarborough went to different prisons 3 years, and he ended up at Centennial Correctional Facility in Canyon City, Colorado. In 2015, he said that part of his insanity was caused by prison food. He writes poems and has self-published poetry books. Gerald Boyle, who defended Dahmer in 2015, said when he says he didn't defend him, he was involved in the investigation. How's this? When he was killed. Gerald Boyle, who defended Dahmer in 2015, said he didn't believe the story that Scarborough killed Dahmer because he was being taunted. Boyle served on a governor's commission that investigated Dahmer and Anderson's murder, and at that time Scarborough never said a word about Dahmer taunting him or any other prisoners about his crimes. Boyle said, "He told me he had a hit list of 5 guys who he did not feel were worthy of the word murderer because of who and how they killed. He felt it was humiliating to be in the same work detail with them." In 1991, Dahmer lived at the Oxford Apartments located at 924 North 25th Street, Milwaukee. It was torn down in 1992. The unimaginable happened in apartment 213. After the 49-unit building was razed, any attempts to put something in its place has not panned out. And even now, the lot is vacant, marking along its perimeter with a fence. Hold on, my exotic dogs decided to make their presence known. Anyway, yes, even now the lot is vacant, marked along its perimeter with a fence. In 1996, Joseph Zilbert won the right to many of Dahmer's personal belongings, many of which were in the apartment. He had found out some of them would be put up for auction. He raised over $40,000 to buy and destroy them. It wasn't only Dahmer's last domicile that was eventually torn down. The Ambrosia Chocolate Factory, where he worked during the late 1980s, was demolished in 1993. After Dahmer's arrest in 1991, there were questions as to whether he'd claim other victims besides the ones he admitted to. The Edmonton Journal reported that German police were looking at Dahmer as a person of interest in 5 mutilation murders near an army base he served at in Baubolter, Germany. Since there were females among the victims which didn't fit his MO, he was never formally accused of the crime. There was another set of murders in central Germany during 1991 that the authorities wondered if they were Dahmer's handiwork. One was Erika Hanschuh, 22, a hitchhiker strangled and stabbed in 1980. However, she did not match the type of victims that Dahmer preferred, which were gay black men. Dahmer and the Army parted ways in March 1981, when he received an honorable discharge. Then he went to Florida and worked in a sandwich shop in Miami Beach. This was when Adam Walsh, 6, was taken from a Sears store and found decapitated in the Miami Canal. Dahmer denied this crime. It was reported by Preston Davis, a soldier who worked in the military med unit, that he was drugged and raped by Dahmer inside an armored personnel vehicle. Another soldier, Billy Joe Capshaw, who was put in a room with Dahmer, also claimed he was raped. He told The Independent, quote, "I'd probably been raped 8 to 10 times. I don't know. He was tying me to the bunk with motor pool rope. He took all my clothing from me. He would either beat me before he raped me or he would beat me after." He complained, end quote. He complained of the incident and was given a rape kit, but nothing was done. He went sent back to his room where Dahmer raped him again. Capshaw escaped out a window. By 1991, Dahmer was averaging a victim per week. Once dead, he would drill holes in his victim's skull, then pour boiling water or hydrochloric acid inside with the idea of turning them into zombies that would submit as his sexual partners. Tracy Edwards escaped from Dahmer in July 1991 and led police to the apartment where he was almost killed. He was hailed as a hero who helped to capture the Milwaukee cannibal. He was lured to Dahmer's apartment the same as other victims, with a promise of beer or money in exchange for posing for nude photographs. The drinks would be drugged and Dahmer would stab or strangle the men while they were unconscious. Edwards, who had absconded from his native Tupelo, Mississippi, was subsequently extradited and arrested for the sexual battery of a 14-year-old girl. Over the years, he had other charges that included theft, property damage, drug possession, and bail jumping. He'd been living on the streets since 2002. In 2011, he was arrested in connection to the death of a man who was thrown from a Milwaukee bridge. He was charged with homicide but pled guilty to the reduced charge of aiding a felon. He was sentenced to a year and a half behind bars. His current whereabouts are unknown. In 2009, Chris Butler bought Jeffrey Dahmer's childhood home in Bath, Ohio, that sits on 2 acres of forested hillside. It's been on the market for 6 months, priced below. It had been on the market for 6 months, priced below anything comparable in the area. The real estate agent is the one that told him why it had been unsold all those months. It was disclosed that in 1978, Dahmer lured and murdered Stephen Hicks, 18, a hitchhiker with a promise of drugs and alcohol. He used a barbell to club Hicks after he said he wanted to leave. He strangled him and then cut up his body in the house's crawl space. Later, he scattered Hicks' bones around the yard. It wasn't until 1991 that Hicks' parents found out what their son's fate had been. Investigators found Hicks' teeth and bone fragments around the grounds of the Bath property. Dahmer was 18 years old when he killed Hicks. This was the year his parents divorced. His father had separated from his mother for gross negligence and moved out to a hotel. Then Dahmer's mother left with his brother and moved to California. Jeffrey Dahmer was left alone in the house. Butler said that those who knew where he lived would eventually ask if he had any ghosts. Roe York and Cheryl Canrem approached him about gathering EVP on the property. They scheduled it on May 21st, which was Dahmer's birthday. Night vision camcorders and audio recorders were placed in the crawl space. Butler left for the night, and when he returned, he found that all of the gear close to the crawl space had malfunctioned. A 2 GB sound file refused to open. In the end, nothing notable was captured. The home was up for sale back in 2012, but never sold. It was listed again in April 2014. In 2016, it was being offered for rent at $8,000 per month. In 2023, Lionel Dahmer, age 87, passed away. He agonized about raising a serial killer. He visited his son in prison monthly after his conviction. Joyce Rocky Flint, I guess her AKA was Rocky, age 64, Jeffrey's mother, died in the year 2000. In 2024, Ariana Grande named Jeffrey Dahmer as her ideal dinner date. Victims' families condemned the singer for glamorizing the serial killer. Let me tell you something. I can understand that. It's like, what celebrity does that? That's so stupid. I look at that, and it's like, who told you that this horrible serial killer who cannibalized this? That you would say something, he would be my ideal dinner date. It's like, I wonder if I don't know, if a public says, "What are you saying? What did you say?" Or something along those lines, like, what? But it's like, yeah. That's why for a lot of these celebrities, you know what? Sometimes you want to say you're just stupid, and then other times I think it's a little bit malicious, like bad attention is better than no attention. But I guess I'm not a fan person. Far from it. I'm not impressed with celebrities of any type, much less ones that say stuff like that. Okay, off to our next story. This is out of Popular Mechanics, titled "Archaeologists Found a Secret Stash of Gold Coins That Rewrite the History of War." Here we go. Mercenary armies weren't cheap in the Greek city of Notion during the 5th century BC, especially with the Persian and Athenian fighters waging a frontline battle in the area. Getting a little extra muscle in the conflict likely required having a bit of spare cash on hand, and archaeologists recently uncovered some of that loot in the form of a hoard of gold coins, which they found buried in a small pot in western Turkey. According to researchers led by the University of Michigan, the gold coins, which were originally discovered in 2023, but only recently okayed for publication by the Turkish Ministry of Culture and Tourism, depict a kneeling archer. The archer was a key signature of the Persian derrick, issued by the Persian Empire and potentially minted during the 5th century BC, about 60 miles northeast of Notion in the ancient city of Sardis. The fact that this literal pot of gold was even found shows that an unlikely scenario befell the owner. The discovery of such a valuable find in a controlled archaeological excavation is very rare, said Christopher Ratt, professor of ancient Mediterranean art and archaeology and direction of the Notion Archaeological Survey, the project that discovered the coins, in a statement. No one ever buries a hoard of coins, especially precious metal coins, without intending to retrieve it, so only the gravest misfortune can explain the preservation of such a treasure. That grave misfortune could have come in the form of the very thing that experts believe the coins were intended for: war. According to the Greek historian Xenophon, a single derrick was equivalent to a soldier's pay for 1 month. Finding a hoard of the coins indicates the possibility that it may have been part of the payment to mercenary troops around Notion. While Ratt admitted that the evidence for the mercenary theory is circumstantial, he believes the timing adds up. Notion, along with other Greek cities on the west coast of present-day Turkey, became part of the Persian Empire in the mid-6th century BC. Then, come the early 5th century BC, it came under Greek control. That didn't last too long, however, as the early 4th century BC saw it return to Persian command until the conquest of Alexander the Great in 334 BC. All this back and forth rule made Notion the front lines of conflict with Greek historians, chronicling the use of barbarian mercenaries during Athenian versus Persian skirmishes. It is battles like these that could have warranted an army collecting enough derrick to pay for additional assistance, but any sort of defeat could have meant that the owners of the coins weren't able to retrieve them, leaving, say, a pot of coins to be found centuries later. Of course, the mercenary idea isn't the only theory in play. As Notion was an important military harbor, the coins could have been part of payment to help build out the waterfront. If a tragedy befell the owner of the hoard, the coins would have simply remained secretly buried. The history of the derrick started in the 6th century and lasted until Alexander the Great's control began around 330 BC. The design of the coins remained relatively similar, with only minor stylistic differences in play. Using the new coins and the independent dating of the coins, thanks to additional artifacts found nearby, to help highlight those style shifts, should help set up a distinct timeline for the derrick. This hoard, Ratt said, will provide a firm date that can serve as an anchor to help fix the chronology of the entire sequence of coins. It can be established accurately by other means to allow us to fine-tune the chronology of the Achaemenid gold coinage, said Andrew Meadows, a former curator of coins at the British Museum and the American Numismatic Society, and now at Oxford University, in a statement. This is a spectacular find of the highest importance. And I want to say maybe a year ago, or maybe a little bit more or less, because as you could tell, sometimes they make these discoveries and they keep mums about it, and then they leak it out after they write a paper on it or whatever. But they had a similar thing in a villa in Spain, where under the lintel or the portico entrance of what I guess would be the equivalent of a barn, for example. Same thing, they found this huge pot of coins. And back then, as you know, the Roman emperors, they would print the coins, they would mint the coins with their likeness. And in it was coins with different emperors. And of course, somebody never came back for it. This was on a farm, a villa. Same question. Obviously, this was a lot of money. They buried it, obviously, to keep it. But the person that hid it never came back for it, which leads you to believe that something must have happened to this person. And I'm going to say something unexpected, because let's face it, even if you're getting sick or you're ill or something, you tell somebody, hey, go to the barn under the lintel, under the this, that, and guess what? You're going to get. So it leads you to believe that whoever had knowledge of what was buried there died unexpectedly, that they couldn't even have a chance to impart the information about where that gold. This was a villa in Spain. I can't remember right now what the name of it was, but same thing. It was an excavation of an existing villa, and as they did more work, they unearthed this. No, I take that back. There were various jars full of these coins. It was not one. It was and mystery. who put it there, because believe me, that's not the kind of stuff you forget about. So anyway, on to our next story. This is out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories, and it's titled The Ghost of Al Capone's Mistress. Capone had many mistresses, but some held his interest longer than others. One of these allegedly was Mary Ann Brown, who also went by the name of Vera. She is a mysterious woman because very little is known about her, if she ever existed at all. Perhaps she used the surname of Brown in imitation of Capone's alias Al Brown, which he used since 1920 when he was the keeper of the Four Deuces Saloon at 2222 South Wabash Avenue. Later in life, he would be known by the more notorious moniker of Scarface. When or where they met is unknown, but chances are that by the time he bought his house in Miami in 1927, they were involved. He paid $40,000 for the 10,000 square foot Mediterranean Revival Estate at 93 Palm Island. He spent $200,000 in improvements. This is where his wife May and their son lived. He had bought the house under her name. By comparison, he bought Vera a modest, newly built stucco and wood bungalow that measured a little over 1,000 square feet. She lived there with her two daughters, Mary and Anne, both allegedly fathered by Capone. But no doubt its appeal lay in the fact that in those years Port Orange, a small town situated in only 29 square miles, was in a remote part of Florida, and the house was a stone's throw from the Halifax River. The perfect setting for transporting illegal hooch brought in by rum runners who loaded up in the Bahamas and came in under the cover of night. There is no known picture of this mystery woman, only that it was rumored she was French and probably had changed her hair color to blonde, which Capone expected from all his girlfriends. So how do we know this woman existed? In 2005, Christopher J. Rollier, who once lived in the Port Orange house, wrote House of Shadows, the Mistress of Al Capone, which detailed his experiences once he bought the property in 1996 and started renovations. He lived there for 10 years. According to Rollier, the place was not only haunted by Vera, but by her bodyguard. He would even go on to blame the ghost for the divorce from his wife. More than likely, though, the man left behind was not a bodyguard, but a mafioso left to guard illegal hooch secreted at the house. He described it this way, quote, "I didn't know it was Capone's mistress until I described her down to the bun on her head. But the bodyguard made me skittish, especially when I was living by myself. I felt he caused us to break up. She, as in his wife, was scared living there, but I never feared for my own life. Old-timers started telling me of a local banker at the time who laundered money in a house across the street. There was also a house in Capone's mother's name in New Smyrna Beach where he'd go." End quote. Rollier said he had a photograph of her in a neighbor's trunk. Eventually, he brought a paranormal team to investigate, who told him the identity of the ghost was Capone's mistress and their daughters. The local historical society has no record of Capone being in the area, but considering he was conducting illegal business plus visiting his favorite mall, it's understandable he would have kept a low profile. However, unofficial sources tell of Capone's visit to Ponce de Leon Inlet and going south on the Halifax River heading to Miami. During the early 1920s, tourism in Miami flourished, especially for tourists fleeing the cold winters up north. However, Dade County had gone dry a full 6 years before the Volstead Act was passed in 1919. Bootlegging was a thriving business. By selling liquor to what was known as blind tigers or speakeasies, it's little wonder Capone made a home there. Then the hurricane of 1926 roared into Miami and put the area into an economic downspin 3 years before the Great Depression hit the rest of the country's economy. Capone's unwelcome stay in Miami was short-lived when he was arrested in 1931 for tax evasion and sentenced to 11 years. In May 1932, he arrived at Atlanta U.S. Penitentiary, which is when he was officially diagnosed with gonorrhea and syphilis. He also had a perforated nasal septum due to his use of cocaine, and now that he was in prison, he suffered withdrawal. His mental acuity declined markedly, and Red Rudinsky, a small-time hood, became his protector from jailhouse bullying. In August 1934, Capone was sent to the recently opened Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. 2 years later, he was stabbed by inmate James C. Lucas. It was hard to recognize the man who was known for his custom suits, costly cigars, gourmet food, and numerous romantic liaisons as well as being the mastermind behind the 1929 St. Valentine's Day massacre carried out while he was at his Miami home. 7 members of the rival George Bugs Moran mob were machine gunned to death while lined up against a garage wall in Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood. This was Capone's style, which was to order other men to do his dirty work. The slaughter led to the federal government stepping in to investigate the gangsters running Chicago. Drawing others to take the heat for him was a regular MO for Capone. In the winter of 1926-27, he met Parker Henderson Jr., who ran the Ponce de Leon Hotel. He was also the son of Miami's mayor. Henderson, who was a gangster groupie, helped Capone buy the mansion on Palm Island. He did this by working with Newt Loomis Jr., the mayor of Miami Beach. He also helped Capone acquire guns and cash checks. In exchange, he got a belt buckle that Capone handed out to his friends, and that cost about $275. But he got more than that. Now known as an associate of Capone, in 1927 he was questioned in the murder of Frankie Yale. Yale was killed in retribution for his murder of Tony Lombardo, who ruled the Unione Siciliana and Chicago. Using 2 pistols thrown away by the killers, including one left next to the body, authorities traced them back to Henderson, who said he had gotten them for Capone. Lucky for Henderson, he was in North Carolina when the crime was committed, which is why he was only interrogated in the matter. Another who were affected by Capone's lifestyle was his family. He had been suffering from syphilis for many years. His son, Albert Sonny Capone, was born with congenital syphilis and a serious mastoid infection. He survived the required brain surgery for the disease, but was left partially deaf. Coincidentally, like the secretive Vera from Orange Park, in 1966 Albert changed his surname to Albert Francis Brown to erase the Capone name. By February 1938, the syphilis in his body had reached Capone's brain, and his last months at Alcatraz were spent in the hospital. He would wear winter clothes in his heated cell and had conversations with long-dead friends. From there he went to Federal Correctional Institution at Terminal Island until November 1939, when the court granted May Capone's appeal for parole due to his poor health. He died in his Miami home on January 25, 1947, age 48. He is buried in Mount Carmel Cemetery in Hillside, Illinois. Surprisingly, for being more an urban myth than reality, the story of Al Capone's mistress just won't go away. However, in this version, Capone kept his mistress and illegal liquor at an old brick house along the Gabordi Canal, located at 1802 South Riverside Drive, New Smyrna Beach. The 2-story brick house dates back to 1926, and like the other property in Port Orange, has access to the Halifax River. The backyard of the property on the south side has a concrete dock. It also has an unusual feature for Florida homes, which is a full basement access from the kitchen or the exterior screen porch. The house's notoriety is more tied in as a place where bootleg booze was stored than a romantic hideaway. It's said this is where those who worked for the mobster played card games and took a rest before heading north with their stash. Perhaps Capone's mistress acted more as a ruse to explain his visits to the area. In 1920, New Smyrna's population was only a scant 2,500, and the property's appraiser's office have no records predating 1955. So there is no way to know who occupied the property about 100 years ago. The local historical society has only heard that it was bought by a lady from Chicago, which might have been Capone's mother. It was a solitary home built out in the middle of nowhere. Another persistent rumor tied to the house is the existence of a tunnel system that stretched the canal and was used by Capone and others to enter the house unseen. The owner of the property in 2018 was told the tunnel had to be filled in a long time before because it was caving in. However, there has never been concrete evidence of this. Jeff Hostetler, who owns a local painting system, said he heard rumors the house was bought in Capone's housekeeper's name, in an effort to keep law enforcement from knowing that Capone was operating in the area. In 1974, there was a mysterious death in the house, where a local woman was found dead in her bed by her husband. She had reportedly been drinking heavily for the past several years and had been taking Valium. However, her pharmacist told police he thought it unlikely an overdose or a mixture of the tranquilizer and alcohol could have caused her death. Foul play was not suspected. However, police were unsure if it was a suicide or an accidental death. Her husband, a retired engineer, 25 years her senior, followed her to the grave the following year. The house was last sold in 2021. Capone seemed to have liked Florida, and there are rumors tying him to Mount Plymouth Hotel and Country Club in Lake County, and that he bought a house for his mother in St. Petersburg. Another place it said he frequented was the Indian River Lodge, a three-story inn which also boasted a basement. It once stood at South Riverside Drive, 6 blocks from the house on Gabordi Canal. During those years, liquor stills kept producing moonshine from the small islands close to Mosquito Lagoon, in addition to what was being offloaded from rum runners. In 1955, long after Prohibition was repealed, a giant still, 45 miles southeast of Sebring, was raided. Authorities seized 405 gallons of moonshine along with 6,525 gallons of mash ready for distilling. After Capone's death, his wife May continued living at their house on Palm Island until 1952, when she sold it. The house, though, could never outrun the reputation of its most famous owner. It was built in 1922 by Clarence Bush, the beer magnate, who left several Anheuser-Busch emblems around the house. It was once featured as having the city's largest private swimming pool. In 1930, Miami police arrested Al Capone's brothers, John and Albert, along with 4 other men after a raid was conducted and liquor was seized. The city fathers were not happy that Capone lived in Miami and would harass him and his cronies in any way they could. It's not coincidental that Capone chose Palm Island as his Florida home. It was right down the street to the Palm Island Club. It was the snoots-only casino opened in 1922 by Ed Ballard, co-owner of the French Lick Casino. It admitted only tourists, the rationale being that if non-locals got fleeced, police would look the other way. Along with the gambling, illegal liquor flowed, as well as all the vices found in a speakeasy were allowed within its walls. The club was taken over by Big Bill Dyer, a New York bootlegger and owner of the racetrack Tropical Park. They offered a show which featured a naked showgirl and a huge glass of champagne. In 1939, it was renamed to the Latin Quarter and was taken over by Lou Walters, the father of Barbara Walters. Other well-known gangsters visited the Palm Island Casino and stayed at Capone's mansion. There was one story associated with Lucky Luciano that was described as, quote, one woman closely associated with Luciano was Gay Orlova, the stage name of a 20-year-old chorus girl in a Broadway show. Luciano repeatedly fell head over heels for her. Born in Russia, she had left with her family during the Revolution. Luciano met her in 1934 after she performed in a show at the Palm Island Casino in Florida. He was staying with Al Capone's brother Ralph in his mansion. After that first meeting, they were smitten with each other and seen around town together. Lee Mortimer, a gossip columnist, asked her what she saw in Luciano. How can you go for that gorilla? He asked. I love Charlie because he's so sinister, she replied. End quote. In 1953, Nat Ratner, a developer, offered new homes on the island, but declared it was the end of the gangster curse on Palm Island. What that curse was has never been fully explained. A scant 3 years after May Capone sold the house, it was up for sale again for only $72,500, which was much less than it was worth. In 1959, it was being rented out as a movie location. In 1961, Harry Renkert, the owner of the house, had his boat explode out by the dock in front of the property. He had built the whole boat from an old hull and hadn't used it for several weeks, and the mishap was blamed as a buildup of gases. In 1967, it was up for sale again by the current owner, Dr. James Shimirakis, furnished or unfurnished at a liquidating price, and referred to in the ad as the Al Capone estate. In 1971, it was up for sale again, as is, for only $60,000. In 1979, Maharaja Ji, God on Earth of the Divine Light Mission, rented the place for $8,800 a month. In 1984, it was owned by Hank and Rose Morrison, which described a strange vibe in the house. They said 10 Palm Island was also being secretly owned by Capone, and like other Capone properties, there was a rumor of secret passageways and concealed rooms. Capone's Miami home eventually fell into disrepair until it was bought by investors in 2015 and renovated with modern amenities. It was purchased in 2021 for $15.5 million, and unexpectedly, in August of 2023, the property was demolished, much to the dismay of local preservationists. As of February 2024, the property is on the market for $23.9 million. That means the lot, just the lot, the house is gone. Capone's original home at 7244 South Prairie Avenue, Chicago, was originally built in 1908 and purchased by the mafia boss in 1923. Capone lived there until he bought his Miami home, after which he let his mother, Teresa Capone, living there. Salvatore Frank Capone's funeral was held there. He was Al Capone's older brother, who was killed in 1924 by police officers Philip J. McGlynn and Lyle Krogan near a polling place in Cicero, Illinois. He had been intimidating voters opposed to the ticket backed by the Torrio Capone mob. All the brothels and gambling joints in Cicero closed down for a couple of hours in tribute to the gangster's death. Teresa died in the home in 1952. It was then sold to William B. Petty. It was last up for sale in 2016. The question is, does Al Capone or any of the important women in his life haunt the homes where he lived or used to carry on illegal activities? And as to forks in the road, some are more important than others. Case in point, Al Capone had an older brother named James Vincenzo Capone, who was the oldest of 9 children born to Gabrielle and Teresa Capone. He ran away from home at age 16 and joined the circus. And after World War I, he legally changed his name to Richard James Hart. He moved to Homer, Nebraska, and became a federal prohibition agent and sharpshooter. He got the nickname of Two Gun Hart after successfully raiding bootleggers. In 1926, Hart became a special agent of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, assigned to the Cheyenne River Indian Reservation in South Dakota. He was tasked with protecting President Calvin Coolidge when he visited the Black Hills. Later, he worked at the Spokane Indian Reservation. He was credited with arresting more than 20 wanted killers in that area and destroying countless stills and arresting moonshiners. He also worked as a law enforcement officer on the Coeur d'Alene Reservation in Idaho. He would go on to become a marshal and justice of the peace. He married Kathleen Winch in 1919, and they had 4 sons. She never learned his real surname till 30 years later, 3 years before he died in 1952. He became known as Al Capone's white sheep brother. Let me tell you something. Of that whole story, this is the one that I thought was great. This thing about this older brother who changes his name totally and goes out to Nebraska. This guy tried to distance himself from the whole family where he grew up, what he was meant to go. He just changed his heart, his heart, listen to heart, his name to Heart, and moved out to the Midwest. He becomes, if for those of you watching the video, there's a picture of him. He becomes, let me enlarge this. There you go. He becomes a marshal and busting up bootleggers and stills, and it's like the total opposite. The total opposite from his brother. From what I read later on in life, when everybody was older, I guess. He did, see his brother and stuff like that, Al Capone. But this guy was like, I'm sorry, but I'm not gonna stick around and become a gangster. I'm gonna go work for the other guys, for the other side. That's a great story, by the way. Anyway, guys, I hope you like this last set of eerie news, and I will be back soon, because believe me, it's a weird, weird, weird world. Talk to you soon.